On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors show off their very wide range of potential outcomes with a very disappointing loss to the Knicks on Friday and a pretty encouraging win to break a three-game losing streak against the Blazers on Sunday. We will dig into the big takeaways from the weekend, why the win against the Blazers complicates the picture even further if you're the Raptors front office trying to decide what in fact to do before the deadline. We'll get to all of that, the good, the bad, the and so much more on your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number, 13, 16, 13, 17? I'll figure it out later of Locked On Raptors for Monday, January the 9th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all of my work just by going to Twitter and following me at Woodley Sean. You can also follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite audio apps. It's much appreciated when you take the time to support the show. Also, we're on YouTube. If you want to go watch the show in video form every day, hello out there, video people. Please go and hit the big red subscribe button over on the Locked On Raptors YouTube channel. It's so appreciated. All the links are down in the description as well to go and do all of the things to support the show. It's always appreciated. And without further ado, let's dive on into your solo episode. Vivek Jacob will be along later this week. Normally we get the Big V Monday tradition here, but Big V is getting ready for the halfway point check-in for our preseason over-unders and props contest with Sahal Abdi. That will be a show that drops on Thursday this week. You have that to look forward to. Big week of the show. We'll tee it up later on. But today, we're digging into a pair of Raptors games, a loss to the Knicks on Friday and a win over the Portland Trail Blazers on Sunday. Yeah, that's what the days are. I don't even know what day it is anymore. Anyway, Raptors go 1-1, and to me, we'll get into some of the sort of smaller takeaways. We're going to dig into Scotty Barnes later on in the show and just how tremendous I think he's been as they've adapted his role. One of his better games of the season on Sunday. And, he kind of is this avenue to lots of good things for the Raptors offense. We'll get to that. We got the good, the bad, the coming up later. But for me, the big takeaway from this weekend is that I get why this has got to be a very difficult decision for the Toronto Raptors front office coming into the deadline as to what exactly the direction is going to be. And it's because we saw the very sort of two far ends, maybe not the two far ends, but two very far apart types of performances from the Raptors on their typical performance spectrum. And, you could take all sorts of takeaways from the loss, say, hey, this was a lifeless, meandering loss where the half court was an absolute nightmare on offense, and it's indicative of a need to blow the whole thing up, start fresh around Scottie Barnes, Pascal Siakam, and OG Anunoby, and say, hey, the rest of this thing isn't working. And hey, you maybe be fair in saying that. You also see on Sunday this game against the Blazers where you get actual real bench production. You get a really good effort from the offense in the half court. You get the starters continuing to kind of coalesce together into a pretty formidable group when they're kind of cooking. And you come and realize after a game like that, like, oh, that's the formula. That's what got the Raptors to 48 wins last season in large part. They forced 1 million turnovers against the Blazers. They withstood a Dame Lillard barrage in the fourth quarter, which is a very difficult thing to do. They, I think, maintained a pretty strong defensive identity. They were on a string, not only against the Blazers, but I think against the Knicks too. They had some really good moments, and they kind of got done in by an insane heat check game from Julius Randle. But either way, against the Blazers, you see, there's actually something worth salvaging here if they kind of cut the shit and just play the way that they can. And that's the big thing, right? Is can they do that reliably? Can they do that over the course of multiple games? One game against the Blazers is not going to convince anybody that this Raptors team is fixed or is worth completely standing pat with going into the deadline. But you string a run of performances like the one against the Blazers together, and maybe you're kind of talking. It's a really hard spot the Raptors find themselves in right now because the timing of it all, the lack of time, the lack of any sort of wiggle room here with what they do. They're kind of being put under duress to make a call on the futures of Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr., potentially other guys as well. when we're still very much in the discovery phase, it feels like, with this team, right? The first half of last season felt like a wash. You had injuries, you had COVID. None of it really felt real. You get into the new year, and they go 34-17 to close the season. They do a lot of the things that we saw them do against the Blazers, where there's reasonable half-court production. It's not amazing. It's not like they're the Kevin Durant Brooklyn Nets or anything like that, but they are still, able to get pretty good looks off. There's 5 options on the floor at all times when they have their starting lineup out there. That works in their favor. When the threes are falling from a guy like Fred VanVleet or a guy like OG Anunoby, that makes things all really kind of work in unison with a lot of cohesion. And then you get a little bit of bench effort, just something to keep the Raptors from having to play their main guys 42 minutes and completely gassing themselves. You give yourself some cushion to actually take a game and be in control of it and fight off runs from the opposing team, as opposed to always having to be the team making the runs. And you see the formula there for a pretty good team, again, that won 48 games last season. The other part of it is the Knicks game, right? Where they just look completely stagnant. They look totally lost on offense. The fourth quarter, the first half of the fourth quarter before another fake comeback, another valiant fake comeback, which I might be kind of a sicko for. I don't know. Maybe I just love punishment. Maybe it's Stockholm Syndrome. I don't know. I just can't stop loving the fake comebacks. But in actuality, they suck, and it was necessary against the Knicks because the offense completely fell off a cliff to start that fourth quarter. Just mid-range jumper after mid-range jumper without much process behind it. And that's the bad of this Raptors team. That's if you're someone who thinks you should be looking to retool and changing up the mix going into the deadline, that's the game you point to where it all kind of falls apart. And a game that was certainly gettable. The Knicks did not perform all that well to me outside of Julius Randle having himself a ridiculous shooting night. That was a gettable game for the Raptors that they just let slip because their offensive process at the start of the fourth quarter was miserable. And it's just, I don't know, man. They've got a dead even point differential this season. They are not as bad as their record suggests, even though surely some of that point differential is buoyed a little bit by the fact that, they have fake comebacks all the time that never result in anything material. You have really sort of equal-sized samples now of the Raptors being excellent the back part of last season and being horrible and really, really inconsistent and frustrating the first part of this season. Trying to figure out which of those samples is more real is the challenge for the Raptors front office right now, and I don't envy the job of having to figure it out, because you could sway me either way. And look, maybe I'm particularly keen on, or particularly prone to being, persuaded by a couple of good games. I certainly, as like a fan, kind of skew more patient, and I'm not in the need of like big moves all the time. And I like to kind of let things play out. I accept my sort of built-in biases here, but there are equal samples of the Raptors being a really good team that, was the talk of the NBA in the back part of last season of being a horrible matchup for whoever they were going to play in the first round. TM, the team no one wants to play in round one. That's what they were, and it was justified. They were really good, and better health in that Sixers series. They might even go on to win the damn thing. Again, it's very hard to sort of parse what's more real. And maybe you're the kind of person who thinks both are, equally sort of valid, right? And it's somewhere in the middle. That's probably what's actually the case. Maybe this isn't a 48-win team right now, as it stands. Maybe it's not a 33-win team as it stands either. Maybe it's actually like a 41, 42-win team on, just the way it's built and on balance. But is that not good enough to sort of say, hey, this isn't in need of a total sort of, nuclear path forward here? Is it enough to say, hey, we didn't take the leap we wanted to from last year? That said, last year set the bar for expectation, maybe unreasonably high coming into the season. Do you sort of recalibrate if you're the Raptors front office and say, hey, it's not gone the way we wanted this year, but there's still stuff here. There's still promising signs. The starting lineup is now a, pretty notable positive over the course of 233 minutes now this season. They're a plus 4.7 net rating per cleaning the glass. That's really good to see. You love that. Is there enough here to say we believe there's a better team than has performed so far this year? It's a good team that's played badly as opposed to just being a bad team. And if that's the answer, then maybe the Raptors do stand pat at the deadline. Maybe they make a small move, for some bench help or something like that, using a Chris Boucher or something and just changing up the deck chairs, whatever. Maybe that's the path. I don't know. Again, I'm not in the position to where I have to make the call, which is great. And look, I still think the arguments for trading Fred VanVleet are very valid. And maybe this season is too far gone. And maybe you just have to come to grips with reality and say, hey, this is not a team that's going to go and be a 6th seed this year. This is not a team that's going to achieve what you hoped it would this year. And because of the realities of the contract situations for guys, Fred VanVleet, obviously, who we'll talk about later on in the section regarding his contract situation, maybe you think, hey, like, as much as it would be nice if we could let this thing ride and just pay everyone and hope that it all kind of develops, maybe on a delayed track, but it still develops into the team we thought it could be at the start of the season, maybe that's where you want to go. But it is, at some point, maybe you just have to kind of decide, hey, the season's lost. We have to do some sort of asset management here, as much as it's a grim thing to do, and maybe it's premature, maybe it's something that, you know, the front office is going to have to hold its nose to do. Maybe it's just the reality of it all. But I think this weekend really kind of hammered home, this is not an easy call. Despite the record, despite everything, there's a world in which this season is sort of like a gap year. It's maybe they kind of flail a little bit. Maybe they finish 11th. Maybe they finish 13th. Maybe they finish 8th. Who knows? They go and they get their first round pick. They add it to the mix and they say, hey, we're going to take off. It's just a bit of a delayed takeoff time. We were de-icing the plane for a season and then we take off. That's a big bet to make if you're the front office, for sure. And you know, certainly the kind of bet that could put your job on a line if you're Bobby Webster, whomever, right? Like if you're saying, hey, no, this team, actually, trust me, it's good. Give it a year and it'll turn it out. Man, that might be right. Like that very well could happen. Scotty Barnes is turning things around here. Fred VanVleet is not going to shoot 33% all season long from 3. It's just not going to happen. He's never done it before in his career. OG, Trent, like these guys have made strides in various, spots. Pascal Siakam's as good as he's ever been. If you can supplement the best players on the team who, again, are performing well together, we'll get into Scotty Barnes and why I kind of think that's making that work right now. But it's a very complex web of decisions, and each one is going to have its own sort of, all right, if you trade Fred VanVleet, how do you replace the shooting and ball handling that he provides going into next season? Can you replace it going into next season? Is that something that's even viable? And if you don't have Fred VanVleet, are you sitting there in 6 months saying, damn, I really wish we had Fred VanVleet right now? It's really hard. It's this weekend, just like the gulf between the performance on Friday and what we saw on Sunday against the Blazers team, that's like fine. They're not amazing. They have bench troubles just like the Raptors do. I think they got 3 bench points in this game, a single Shaedon Sharpe 3. It's not great, but there is, it's way more complex than just, well, trade all the guys because the team's not winning. It's just, this is not your typical team that is stuck in the proverbial middle, right? They have plenty of upward mobility just based on the internal guys they have. Precious Achiuwa, Christian Koloko, who we'll talk about later, obviously Scotty Barnes, like those guys give them internal growth and sort of a ceiling that has been yet to be tapped into. It's tough. We'll continue on here. We're going to dive into Scotty Barnes and why he's given me a lot of hope with the way the Raptors are using him. And, if he can kind of do what he did last year and really kind of hit stride in the second half of the season, maybe this adds even more complication to the whole decision-making process before the deadline. We'll get to that in just 1 second. Before we do that, however, I want to tell you about our friends over at TurboTax. Look, for me, I'm a freelance sports media person. I do most of my work for an American company. My taxes are a nightmare to do every single year. I hate it. Really, really can't stand to do it. So guess what? I go to TurboTax, baby, and I get someone to do them for me. You can go to TurboTax.com. Don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Doing not taxes is the best thing. You can show your eyes things that are not taxes. You can unpack a moving box of not taxes, taste not taxes, smell not taxes. Doing not taxes is the very best way to spend your time. With the TurboTax 100% expert guarantee, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax, full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, we continue on here with your first listen of the day. Digging into now maybe sort of my biggest positive takeaway from the whole weekend, which was Scotty Barnes. And I think him having maybe his best game of the season. It's been, I think, a good thing that we've been saying this a lot about Scotty Barnes of late. Yes, there have been some not so great performances mixed in there, of course. We saw in the game against the Knicks on Friday, just like not enough offensive punch. We saw for 3 quarters against the Bucks, not enough offensive punch. And against the Blazers, we really saw, I think, Scotty Barnes start to weaponize the way teams are defending him. We've seen a really extreme style of defense from other teams over the last little while here, last couple weeks, I'd say, with how they're guarding the Raptors and how they're just kind of daring Pascal Siakam to have to do everything. And it's not really working, right? Like Siakam right now is going through a bit of a hard time. A nice game to sort of bounce back. He got to the line a million times, 27, 4, and 6 with 2 steals and a block against the Blazers, and it didn't feel like an overwhelming Siakam game. That just kind of speaks to how good he is and how he just kind of walks into his averages anyway most nights. But we're seeing the limits of, hey, Siakam, go do stuff and make stuff happen for the team, because teams are treating him like it's Tampa all over again. They're meeting him with 2 or 3 bodies in the paint. They're really, really loading up on him. And they're forcing him to trust his teammates, and the teammates aren't doing a great job of instilling said trust because they're not hitting their shots. So they haven't been for the most part this season. And there's just like a limit as to how effective your offense can actually be when your best player is plunging into 3 guys all the time. It's a really high level of difficulty, and they need another outlet. They need someone to grease the wheels. Who better than the guy who the other team is not guarding at all in Scotty Barnes? And I think we're finally starting to see, we saw some very, I think, trepidatious play from Scotty Barnes the last week or two here as teams have started to just completely sag off of him. I think the most sort of extreme example to begin this run was against the Pacers last Monday, where Miles Turner's just hanging out 20 feet away from him in the paint. And Scotty Barnes, to his credit, was trying to make stuff happen. He was doing dribble handoffs, stuff like that, but wasn't enough taking it upon himself to try and score. We saw in the Blazers game, Jusuf Nurkic not guarding Scotty Barnes at all. He hits, in the first quarter, a mid-range jumper, stepping into that sort of free throw line area where there's just nobody guarding him right now. Hits it. Also hits a catch-and-shoot 3 in the first quarter. It took all of 2 makes for Scotty Barnes to change the way the Blazers had to think about him on defense. A little later on in that first quarter, he steps into that free throw range. Jusuf Nurkic is there. A piece of help comes over for him as well. And all of a sudden, Trent Jr. is leaking out of the basket. Scotty Barnes is hitting him for a wide open bucket. That's really how simple it can be. It's just establish that you can take that shot, that you're happy to take that shot, and you're going to be off and running. Also, Scotty Barnes is a guy who can go and score over pretty much anyone in the league. We saw that with Brook Lopez last week becoming his lunch in the late going of that game against the Bucks. He's getting right now a runway with which he can really make stuff happen. And I think he's, again, starting to weaponize that and realizing, hey, like, I get myself into the middle of the defense. I can plunge into the defense here, touch paint, and I'm Scotty freaking Barnes. I can throw any pass in the book. I can score over anybody. There's so many options for me once I get here. It's really, I think, kind of greasing the wheels of the Raptors half-court offense when he does that. And we saw against the Blazers pretty much a full game of Scotty Barnes being the sort of connective piece of the Raptors offense. And we saw one of their better ball movement and passing games in quite some time. I think he just has a kinetic energy. He does. He's a guy who's always been pass first, right? There were all the stories of him in college and in high school and working with coaches in the lead up to the draft, where I think his college coach, Leonard Hamilton, asked him, hey, you got to go out and score 25 points a game and just play with that mindset. And I think his response was, I'm quoting, I think, a story from Mike Schmitz, the former ESPN guy who's now with the Blazers front office. But the story he said on the Low Post podcast with Zach Lowe, his something along the lines of Scotty asking, hey, do assists count as points? Like, he's wired to throw passes first. He's wired to look for guys and set guys up. He's a point guard at heart. At least that's how he's branded himself coming into the league and throughout his career. And so I tend to believe him when he says that. And he's a guy who's looking to get other guys their shots. And I think when he's using that space in the middle of the floor, because of his height, because he can survey everything, because it leaves Pascal Siakam as an off-ball option who can go and, attack a closeout or, find a mismatch on the wing or even just bomb a corner three. Because you have Scottie Barnes and Gary Trent Jr. and OG Anunoby, your three best shooters roving around that, it just creates a more sort of flowing and, just like sensical half-court offense, frankly. And I think Scottie Barnes is just such a great way to sort of tie it all together because of the way he reads from the middle of the floor. You throw in the fact as well that he's like really made some strides defensively because the Raptors are using him in a different spot now. They're using him as that sort of nominal center. His rim protection has been really strong. Even, Damian Lillard a couple times. He's a very difficult guy to stop as a defender, as a big man. He's torched big men and dropped for his entire career. That's his whole thing. But Scottie Barnes, I thought, acquitted himself pretty nicely. Even a couple of Lillard's makes were super difficult around Barnes, over Barnes in the game Sunday. He was, I thought, excellent defensively as well against the Knicks on Friday. That loss is not on him by any means. And so, yeah, I just feel like we're seeing Scottie Barnes kind of realize, all right, these are the ways I can affect the game right now. There's a time in the future where he might be the point guard of the team. It might be as early as next season where he's got the ball in his hands all the time. But right now, as a conduit in the middle of the floor, connecting things, finding shooters, finding cutters, he's really kind of thriving. And he's also got the scoring chops as well to go do it when he needs to. You throw in 3 steals, 2 blocks, 22, 9, and 4 overall. Like, really, really great game from Scottie Barnes. And the exact type of performance they're going to need from him. Fred VanVleet speaking after the game about him, I thought pretty wise stuff, digging into why, it's good that he's kind of struggling this season to sort of get that experience, kind of adjusting to the way the league is adjusted to him. He's adjusting back now. The latest adjustment is we're not guarding you at all. And he's starting to really take advantage of that reality. And it's a good sign for the Raptors. It's a good sign going forward. And again, another thing that complicates matters here, because if Scottie Barnes can be the sort of vessel by which the half-court offense gets a little less predictable, a little less Siakam-centric, and sort of frees Siakam up to pick his spots, frees the offense up to kind of play this flowing style where it's pinging around, then that makes the whole deadline decision time that much more difficult as well. That's the overarching thing for everything it seems to be going on with the team right now, is everything that happens informs what the decision-making is going to be in a few weeks' time, a month's time, whatever it is. And this is one of them good problems, right? Oh, Scottie Barnes is playing really well and maybe unlocking a new sort of ceiling for the offense. Woo, that's good stuff. As much as it makes it difficult to sort of parse what's real, what's not ahead of the deadline. Really, really good stuff from Scottie. He's really turned it around here, I think, the last few weeks. There are still some stinkers in there. He needs to be more aggressive start to finish, which he was in that Blazers game, and you saw the beautiful effects of it. If he can kind of carry that forward, things are looking up for the Raptors' previously wretched offense. Maybe they can just be normal, good old bad. We're going to come back on the other side and get into the good, the bad, and the to round out the weekend. We'll talk about a couple of notes from over the weekend and also the Fred VanVleet contract stuff, which was talked about in a piece by Tim Bontemps over at ESPN. We love Timmy Goodtimes here, the best ESPN reporter, I would say, who's coming around. I mean, Zach Lowe is great too, but Timmy B knows what he's doing. We're going to come back on the other side, get into the good, the bad, and the Before we do that, however, I've got to tell you about our dear friends over at Built Bar, who are the best. They make the best tasting protein bars in the game. I'm not someone who likes protein bars, like, at all. They're really not my thing. Built Bar has changed that because they're delicious. They make it feel like I'm being indulgent, and boy, oh boy, do I love to be indulgent. But Built Bars, they're helping me wean off of all the crap I was eating over the holidays. I always kind of get into slob mode during the holidays, but now it's back. Real life is coming back. I'm feeling terrible all the time. Built Bars are the way for me to power up a workout or just get through the morning and have a nice snack that's not going to weigh me down or anything like that. You get 130 calories, way less than your standard candy bar, just 4 grams of sugar and 17 grams of protein, that is, in each of your bars as well. Right now, you can go to Walmart and pick up a box. They are available there. Go check them out. They have all sorts of flavors for you. You can pick up a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. All sorts of other fantastic flavors as well. Those puffs, if you like Marshmallow Delights, if you feel like having yourself a little indulgence, those puffs are a really good way to go. Go check them out right now at Walmart and Built.com as well. It's Built, baby. Go check them out. All right, let's continue on here with your first listen of the day, bringing in the good, the bad, and the to round out today's show, the way we round out every game recap episode from or covering your Toronto Raptors. I don't know. You know the deal by now. The good for me, I feel like this is my good every single time out now, but Gary freaking Trent Jr., man, he is really, really making the case to keep him around beyond the trade deadline. He was, I think, the guy to trade de jour for the first many jours of the season. He felt like he was telegraphed to be moved by the deadline. He was, the role was oscillating. Nick Nurse was calling him out. He moved to the bench. And he has responded extremely well to all of the criticism, to the oscillations in role, to the moving to the bench. And he's playing the best ball I think we've seen him play as a Toronto Raptor. We saw last night that little bit of bench production they got, that second quarter run that really was like, as Fred VanVleet said, it was kind of what won them the game. It gave them a cushion. It held them ahead and gave them like some control of the game. The bench wasn't as great in its second run. It was up against the Blazers starters, which is maybe more of a Nick Nurse thing than it is the lineup's fault. But, Gary Trent Jr. out there with Malachi Flynn and Chris Boucher and Precious Achiuwa, Thad Young, Christian Koloko, both swapping in there as well as the 5. And we saw Gary Trent Jr. kind of do the thing I think most people who were on Team Sixth Man Gary at the start of the year, which I certainly was, he did what we hoped he could, just carry an offense just enough to allow for it to survive with good defense. And he did that. That second quarter run where they, kind of run out ahead of the Blazers, get up to 19-point lead, I think. It was 50-31 at one point. Like, that is just like a breath of fresh air, man. And again, kind of what we hoped Gary Trent Jr. could be capable of. I still think there are limits to it. I probably wouldn't go him and 4 bench guys all the time just because I don't know if there's enough creation there. I don't know if there's enough playmaking there. He's just not ever looking to pass necessarily, but they got by enough with the defense and a couple of big shots from him. Precious Achiuwa, factoring in as well. Chris Boucher in there too with a couple of moments. Gary Trent Jr., man, he's really good, and he fits really well. We know he's a wonderful fit next to Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes. Like, he's just, as a trigger man at the end of those guys' playmaking sequences, you can't really ask for more, honestly. And I think now at this point, you have to really look long and hard at paying him his next contract and just having him be part of the team. It's probably still going to be a movable deal. The cap's going up. If he's making $25 million a year, I don't know. That's probably what he's looking at. I suppose he's at like 17, 18 right now. Maybe you get him for less than that. Deals always end up coming in lower, it feels like, than we project them to be middle of the season. But if you can keep Gary Trent Jr. for $100 million or over 4 years or even less, might be compelled to do it because of the way he fits with this team, especially if you're moving on from Fred VanVleet, which still might be the right move. We'll talk about that in a sec. I think Gary Trent Jr.'s got to stay. How can you just ship off the shooting, which you very clearly have a dearth of already, when you have a guy you know you're going to have his bird rights, you're going to have the team control to potentially bring him back, sign and trade, whatever, if it comes to that. But maybe you just say, like, dude, you're one of our guys. Come on in. And it's tough. These are not easy calls, but I think the way Gary Trent Jr. has played, Kayla Gray even noting on the broadcast yesterday, Nick Nurse sort of commending Gary Trent Jr. for his adaptability, the way he's been coached, the way he responds to feedback. Like, that's great to hear from a guy who was calling out Gary Trent Jr. just a couple months ago. I think he's playing himself into the plans a little bit here, and I think that's a good thing. Like, a guy who can score you 20, 25 sort of as a microwave, who can shoot like that, who can force turnovers, has played better defense of late. That's a good player to have around, and I'm not upset if they decide to keep him around and not deal him at the deadline. In fact, I might be happy. An honorable good, by the way, to Christian Koloko. I thought he was really good against the Blazers. And look, if you're looking for reasons to justify moving on from Fred VanVleet, micro, small sample reasons, the numbers of the Barnes, Trent, OG, Siakam, Koloko lineup, which in theory, if you move on from Fred, could be your starting lineup as soon as next season. Right now, plus 29.3 net rating, 97th percentile among all NBA lineups, 91st percentile on offense, 92nd percentile on defense, all per cleaning the glass. Look, he's really green. It's going to take some time. He might not be there for a couple years, but... And look, I've also not enjoyed how much he's played necessarily while the team's kind of been in season-saving mode because of how green he is, but... You see last night, there's a little bit more finishing. He's finishing around the basket. He has the big, catch on the Pascal air ball and finish late in crunch time that all but seals it. Pretty solid defense. The size is obviously enormous, in all sorts of ways for this team, both literally and figuratively. he's green. He's got some time to go here, but I think you can safely say that Christian Koloko is going to be a good one. He's going to be a guy who's on this team for a while. He's going to be a positive contributor on this team. And the way he sort of makes the big lineups work, it's pretty intriguing, man. Maybe Vision 6'9" is not dead. Maybe Vision 6'9" just needed a 7'1" guy to tie it all together. Again, very small sample here. But his performance, the defense has been way better when he's been on the floor this season. There's a lot to like there from Christian Koloko. As much as I've maybe been a little hard on how much Nick Nurse has leaned on him, I guess that's why you do it. Maybe that's just in-season player development, and you take the lumps, and now you're getting some pretty decent performances from Koloko here. Good stuff. Not a decent performance is my bad. And look, sometimes you make a resolution for yourself. Sometimes you say, I'm not going to eat beef all year. I'm going to go to the gym this year. Sometimes you backslide, and that's part of the deal, right? I came into the season saying, I'm not talking about refs this year. I just hate ref talk. It's stupid. The idea of a conspiracy theory against a team that just won an NBA championship like 4 years ago is very stupid. The idea that the NBA is against Canada, it's just so dumb, and I'm not even entertaining it. The idea that any one game is all that tied to the outcome of a ref, I've never really bought. It all comes out in the wash. That said, my bad, and I'm just scratching that itch. I'm letting myself backslide for one day. The crew in the game against the Blazers was truly incompetent. Ben Taylor, man oh man, there is not a ref whose face I cringe at when I see more. He just has like this smarm to him. It seems like him and Nick Nurse don't get along, because I kind of both think they are the guys who think they're the smartest guys in the room. And when you get those two people in the room and only one can be the smartest guy in the room, probably neither of them are. But if only one guy can actually be that, they're going to clash. It feels like those guys don't like each other. The sort of like theatrics with the challenge calls. Obviously, the Scotty Barnes block on Josh Hart yesterday that inevitably got called a Fred VanVleet foul. Also kind of a phantom call. But Ben Taylor going like, this was a successful challenge. However, just like, dude, we get it. You're in the building. Cool. Good job. Like, this was an unwatchable basketball game. It was a really, really bad ref show. The third quarter took way too long for any third quarter of any basketball game ever to take. Just like the ticky-tack stuff, the inconsistencies, the constant ref conferences to figure out basic calls like, did Pascal Siakam indeed throw the ball out of bounds uninhibited? Oh, I guess we have to, review that because we got it wrong. Just a really, really poorly officiated game. I think it was Tom Haberstroh, who kind of keeps track of ref crews and stuff like that, said that the crew that they had yesterday, I think it was Ben Taylor, Natalie Sego, and Nathan Scott, is like an 8th percentile crew in terms of ref quality. Crazy. Really, really bad. It totally checks out because that was really poorly officiated. And I've only had the urge to get back into my ref-hating ways this season when Ben Taylor has appeared on my screen. There's just something about that dude. Really, really drives me nuts. Anyway, just had to get that off the chest in the bad. Let's go to the round it out. Fred VanVleet's comments about never receiving a formal extension offer from the Raptors in the offseason seems like more, I think, ominous than it does. Sounds as though it was pretty mutual on both ends for there not to be a formal offer there. Of course, Fred VanVleet's still eligible right now for a 4-year, $114 million extension. If you go back to the summer, it seemed like that was a done deal. It seemed like it was going to happen. I know our pal Jake Fisher from Bleacher Report, now Yahoo, was talking about, hey, like, this is very likely to happen, and it didn't happen. And it seems as though Fred VanVleet, once again, betting on himself, can't fight with that. It's worked for him in the past. Go nuts, dude. But he thinks he's worth more than 114, and that's challenging because I don't know if that's the case. Look, the cap's going up, so all of this kind of has to be couched in that. The cap is probably going to go up a lot between now and the end of whatever Fred VanVleet's next contract is, and so that has to be factored in here. There's inflation at play here, but for 114, like, that almost feels kind of like close to the high end. Is Fred VanVleet a better player now than he was when he signed his contract? Yeah, probably, but where is he headed? Is he, as we talked about at length on Friday with Joe, like, is he on the decline? Is this a poorly timed slump before he snaps back to his regular career averages? In which case, maybe you're totally fine paying him north of 114. Maybe 120, 125 you're comfortable with as a deal that's going to age well. I don't know. That scares me a little bit. And look, Fred VanVleet is more than well within his rights to say, hey, I'm going to wait and go to market or see what, I can get after I opt out. Totally fair. But will he get that? It's hard to say. It's not like the whole league is flush ever with cap teams. I think there's going to be more cap teams than there are, or salary cap room teams this year than they typically have been in previous years. But is a team, the same questions for Fred VanVleet and the Raptors apply to other teams in Fred VanVleet, right? Are they worried about a decline? Are they going to offer him more than 114? It hangs over everything going into the deadline here, right? And we talked at length on Friday, so I'm not going to relitigate it all as to sort of the pros and cons of trading Fred VanVleet. I just know it's not an easy decision as much as everyone wants to make it out to be. Ship off Fred, get rid of him. It's not. If you go back to that Friday show, the trade market, the landscape of teams that might be a match, it's not exactly robust right now. Maybe the fact that the Lakers are playing themselves back in contention of, the play-in or whatever in the West, maybe that changes things. LeBron James agitating for moves, maybe that changes things. Maybe the Lakers become a Fred VanVleet team. Who knows? But the sort of landscape out there is not terribly rosy if you're looking for, a bidding war necessarily. And so it is, like, I don't know the right answer. I don't think there is like a notably wrong answer here necessarily. But I'm very, very interested to see exactly how this Fred thing transpires because, for me, I still think I'm fine to sort of ride it out here. And Tim Bontemps pointed out in his piece where he talked about this and VanVleet's situation, talking about how the Raptors are this sort of team that everyone around the league is looking at as, all right, what are they going to do? Can we get their good players? My favorite brand of NBA story, by the way, is team exec talks to reporter about how much they want the Raptors guys. That's a large part of the ESPN story, although I think Bontemps does a good job, as he usually does, of contextualizing everything. But yeah, it's... I wish it were easy, man. I really wish it were as easy as you just trade Fred. But the market factors at play, whatever his next contract situation are going to be, it's not getting any easier. And with every good performance, with every pair of massive crunch time threes he hits, every time the dam breaks just a little bit more on his bad three-point shooting season, which we've started to see of late a little bit more, I do wonder how the Raptors are going to do this. And look, do I think the Raptors should do nothing going into the deadline? Not necessarily. I think something's got to happen just to sort of set themselves up better for next season. But if you think the Raptors' first inclination is to not be patient and let things ride, you're kidding yourself because that's their MO. That's what they've done for the entirety of the Masai Ujiri era. They make their moves and be bold when they have to be, but for the most part, they're going to be patient. They're going to let things ride out. And going back to the very beginning, if you think this Raptors team can find something resembling what they did against the Blazers more often going forward here, maybe the whole Fred VanVleet thing doesn't come to a head right now. Maybe it, in fact, just waits to the offseason, and maybe he's a sign-and-trade guy. Maybe they bring him back. Maybe he doesn't get what he wants elsewhere, and he settles for 114. Who's to say? But it's going to be the thing that dominates our lives, I think, for the coming weeks here for sure. With that, we're going to round out the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again on Tuesday with a wonderful guest, Josh Gondelman, the hilarious stand-up comic, formerly head writer for Desus and Miro. He's going to be on with Katie Heindel and I. We're going to have some fun. He's going to give Raptors fans a pep talk, which is his very wonderful thing that he likes to do on his various platforms of engaging with folks, Twitter, his Substack newsletter, his former podcast, Make My Day. All of it's there. So Josh Gondelman, very excited about that tomorrow. Either way, later in the week, we've also got Hornets recap Wednesday. We've got the over-unders halfway point check-in with Sahal and Vivek on Thursday. Jamar Hines on Friday talking about Hornets Raptors 2.0. Loaded week for you. Thank you so much for supporting the show. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, have a good one, and go make your second listen of the day. Locked On Leafs. The Leafs are good. They won by a lot last night. Go check them out. Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner doing things. Dave Morisuti, Mike DiStefano also doing things, hosting Locked On Leafs. Go check it out. And with that, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.